You're listening to the Practical Tax Podcast with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. The information contained in this podcast is based upon information available as of date of recording and will not be updated for any changes in law or regulation. Any information is not to be considered tax advice or legal advice and does not form an attorney-client relationship. Further, this podcast may be construed as attorney advertising. You should seek professional consultation for your individual tax and legal situation.
Hello, welcome again to another edition of Practical Tax with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. Steve, when you think about intellectual property, it's funny, we were talking with an intelligence officer on one of the last shows we did, and I think about when people talk about intellectual property, it is interesting because if you were to purchase something that was intellectual property, like if I wanted to purchase a copyright for somebody, does that have all of the same entanglements of a regular sale when it comes to tax and the federal and state governments?
You know, when you talk about tax and you talk about entanglements, the answer is almost always yes.
Okay, fair enough. We'll dive into that a little bit deeper. Our next guest is known as the patent professor. He's an adjunct professor of patent law at Nova Southeastern Law School in Florida. He's written 2 books on patents, and John Rizvi is nice enough to join us here for Practical Tax with Steve Moskowitz. Hello, John.
Hi, John.
Yes, how are you? Pleasure to be here.
Great. I love that you have the patent professor, and it has a little R on there. I tried to find that on my computer one day, and it's on a Mac. It's like you got to hold 6 buttons down at the same time. But let me ask you that: do you have to? And I've heard this before with, like, I don't know if it's copyrights or trademarks or patents, but when you get it done, you have to let people know that you have a patent on it, right? Or the rights to it can start to slip away. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so you have to put people on notice. So patents and trademarks are both different. And briefly, a patent protects an idea, like an invention, and trademarks protect brands. So whereas the patents, you would mark the product with U.S. patent number, and you'd have a patent number. With trademarks, and I don't know if this is going to show up well on screen. I have like a cup of coffee. But
Starbucks, we see it.
Yep, everyone is seeing the R. Oh my God, the R with the circle around it on the logo. And I don't know
Gotcha.
if everyone knows what I'm talking about. For a trademark, that indicates that it's a registered trademark. Now, sometimes you'll see a TM, and a TM is putting people on notice that you're seeking rights to that name, but it's not necessarily been granted yet by the trademark office. But it's very important to label and put others on notice. Otherwise, and there's a lot of advantages, but it eliminates, the defense of, like, I didn't know that was a trade name. For patent cases, there's a defense of innocent infringement. It doesn't get you off the hook as an infringer, but it at least makes it more difficult for a judge to award punitive damages, because it makes it look like it's an accident. But if you have your registered trademark on every time you have your brand, you have it on your sign, your website, your business cards, letterhead, then it makes it really hard for somebody to say, I didn't, that it was accidental. The same thing with a patented product.
Steve, when you have somebody coming to you and they want to start a new business and they want to name the business, is there a process, a road you send them down to make sure the name they're choosing hasn't already been chosen by somebody else? And this is a question for you, John, in just a second. And does that, do you have to go outside of your market to see if somebody like in Omaha or something has that same name?
That's why I refer him to somebody like John.
Interesting. But, because it's funny, it's like, it's something that it's so important. And I'm going to guess that most of the small businesses that we all run into spend an inordinate amount of time trying to come up with a name for their business. And again, that's just one aspect of intellectual property, because we see this all the time in Silicon Valley, with different type of software that's created, and does it infringe on another? And I guess here's a question for you. If I sue somebody for infringement, okay.
Right.
Steve, if in the money, what I have to pay to that people, if I violated the law and I had to pay them, would that be tax deductible?
Well, we have to see what's happening, and we have to be careful, because a lot of times penalties are not. So when you reach a settlement, a lot of times what you're doing is, what am I paying for? And what you want to do is make sure you're paying for something that is tax deductible. And that's true if you're on the other side of the lawsuit. What am
Mhm.
I getting? And what am I getting? Is it taxable, non-taxable? Is it ordinary income, capital gains? So these are all things that are negotiated before you actually finalize it. Or
John,
should be.
John,
Most
you've been
people don't because they don't think about the taxes, but when they bring in a tax attorney, it's the first thing we think about.
well. You guys have obviously both being attorneys. I'm sure you cross over your interests all the time. Um, I'm kind of curious about the field of intellectual property. Obviously, it's changed dramatically since the internet. Right? I mean, there's probably people listening to us right now that have online newsletters, and they just go to Google Images and grab them and throw them on their page. Is that a worry? Would you advise somebody not to do that?
Oh, yeah, it's an absolute worry. And I think, sometimes, the internet's made a lot of things easier, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's made it safer. I think it's made copying so much easier because, as you said, people go to Google Images and they'll right click, save the image, and then use it on their website. And that's copyright infringement. Like they might be lucky and it might be an image that's part of that's part of the public domain and nothing happens, but it's kind of a crapshoot. You're taking a huge risk. It's always better to get permission, or like worst case, if there's an image, it's safer to link to the image than to actually grab the image and put it on your website.
Can I grab something from a government website and put it on there, since I pay for the government, right? My tax, does it belong to me? I'm not being facetious. I mean, does it apply pretty much for across the board? Will the government actually copyright things and trademark things as well?
They do. They do. In fact, I mean, even there might even be patented uh, ideas that's owned by the government. So I don't that would not be a safe approach to assume just because it's on a website that ends with .gov that anything you see there is fair game. In fact, sometimes they might have stuff on their website that they have licensed from a private individual. So that individual is given rights to the government, but they don't transfer to you. They don't. That doesn't mean that some third party sees that image on the government website and gets to take it.
Hmm. Is intellectual law keeping up with the sweeping changes in technology?
Well, the laws are always a little bit behind, and and intellectual property is no different. Perhaps it's in some ways a lot more behind because things develop way faster online, and it's usually years before the laws catch up. For example, when domain names first became available, there were no laws preventing individuals from
Yeah.
getting trademark domains. There were 18-year-olds registering things like McDonald's.com and whatever, BurgerKing.com, and then and holding those names hostage, selling them back to the corporations, sometimes for millions of dollars.
It happens a lot. I mean, I know there's a friend of mine, Malcolm Nance, who's a regular on MSNBC, and somebody squatted on his name, and he looked into it, and it would cost him $10,000 to get it back. You can go to like ICANN, which is the company that but it was a pretty long project to try to get that back. And I think that for businesses that are starting up that don't have a lot of money, and we've all seen some businesses like restaurants, and they'll put some golden arches there. And I've seen this before. In fact, a famous one here in California, In Out, has that. I don't know if you ever noticed that, Steve, that it kind of has a golden arch to it. And I always wondered to myself, if they kept that up long enough and McDonald's did not come to them and say, take that down, would they sort of own it at the same time? I mean, right? Doesn't the person who has that trademark, as I mentioned in the beginning, have an obligation to go out and stop them, a registered trademark?
Yeah. So the term of art in intellectual property is called policing your mark. So you have to police your mark. You have to look out for instances of infringement. If you don't, catch them, that doesn't mean the alleged infringer ends up getting rights to it, but it certainly weakens. It gives them a defense. So it's like they couldn't go and stop somebody else from using a mark that they're on, but they would have a defense against your lawsuit for trademark infringement, claiming abandonment, that you basically abandoned the mark. It's really similar. I don't know how familiar you are with the concept of adverse possession in real estate. That if there's in real estate, if you have a piece of land and a neighbor ends up using, like plants a row of trees or something on
Right.
your property. In Florida, there's a period of 7 years. If their encroachment on your property is adverse, it's hostile, meaning it's not with permission, and it's open, it can be seen. Then guess what happens after 7 years? That person that planted the trees on the wrong side or put his fence on your property, they end up getting rights to that property by adverse possession, by openly possessing it because you didn't enforce your rights. So the purpose is they want they want some settlement to property disputes. So they don't want things left, so that 20 years, 30 years later, somebody can come forward and say, oh, wait a minute, that driveway's on my property. Like, you have 7 years to watch your property. And if somebody starts putting things or using your property, you have an obligation to take action. And that's real property, but intellectual property, which is what I practice, the law of ideas, that's not any different. You have a duty to police your intellectual property as well, whether it's a brand or whether it's a new idea.
Well, I mean, like a great example, the show is called Practical Tax. There are other shows in the world called Practical Tax, but it's obviously we have Steve's name to it as well. So it's tax attorney Steve Moskowitz, Practical Tax, and it's interesting to see. When I went around and I was researching it, it's okay if we're not infringing on somebody, you can still have the same name. And that's, my name Chip Franklin. There's a guy on either TikTok or Instagram who's named Chip Franklin. And he has I have 100,000 followers. He has 50. And he gets all these angry emails at him thinking they think he's me. and I was like, wow, do I have any responsibility there? He said, can you please take your name off your bio? Because everybody mixes it up with me. And I go, no. And it's I don't know. With taxes, it's zeros and ones. And this is kind of zeros and ones and how you interpret a 0 and 1, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. John, great. That was great stuff. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Yep. Pleasure.
Again, that's the patent professor, John Rizvi. Again, we'll put more up at the end of the show so you can find him. Thanks again. Somebody actually emailed this to me at one point. I get paid in cash. How will the IRS know how much I get paid? And there's two questions. There's a moral aspect to that. And then there's also the legal part. How will they know if ever?
Very easy question. It doesn't matter. You report all your income, whether you're paid in cash or anything else. It doesn't matter. Plain and simple. And it's a felony. We're talking about tax evasion, not to do that. So the bottom line is, anybody that says something like that, my response is don't even think about it. You get paid, you report everything that you got paid, whether you got paid in cash or anything else.
If I win $100 in a poker game, I got to declare that?
Absolutely.
What if I lose $100 in a poker game? Can I deduct that?
Yes, if you itemize deductions up to the amount of your gambling winnings.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So when you lose in Vegas, if you do that a lot, then you can, in your file a long form, there might be a way for you to deduct that?
You should keep record of all your gambling winnings and losses. So if you win a casino jackpot and you lost some money at the racetrack, you can offset one against the other.
I love it.
But remember, you have to report the gross revenue, and then in your itemized deductions, deduct it up to the amount of your winnings, unless you're a professional gambler.
And that's a whole nother thing, right?
Whole different thing.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Does the same apply for market losses and all as well?
When you talk about market losses, then you're talking about realized or unrealized. So you take a look at the stock market. You buy a stock for 100 today, and tomorrow it's 90. Although your stock's worth 10 less, you haven't sold it, so you haven't realized anything. There's nothing to report. Now, if you sold it, then you'd have capital loss.
One last question along those lines. What if I found $1,000? Is that income?
So what happens is it's known as the accretion of income. It's like people that go searching for treasure. So the bottom line is you have something more now.
It's interesting to walk around the city and to view construction undertake. And I always wonder how long it takes to put up a building, and the process of that. And it seems to me that just watching here the Salesforce Tower go up, right? That thing seemed to take forever. And then, of course, we know the story of the Millennium Tower here in the city. That is, for those that don't know, we have a high rise in the city. Was it like 50 stories about, Steve? Do you remember about that?
It's up there.
Yeah, it's up there. And it's tilting. You can go on the top floor and put a marble in the corner and will roll across the floor. But it's apparently safe to live. And now they're going to somehow go underneath it. The world of construction is to me, not only fascinating, but in many times it's also a reflection of how we're doing as a city, as a state, and a country. Our next guest is Shelly Armato. She is a CEO of My Smart Plans, which is a certified woman-owned business that works to make construction and the whole industry more efficient. And she's managed over $12 billion in construction projects, and is also for a leading voice for getting more women involved in construction. And Shelly joins us here on Practical Tax. Hello, Shelly.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. This is Steve Moskowitz here. I'm Chip Franklin. And
Hi, Shelly.
Hi, Steve.
So let's just jump right into it. What does construction tell us about the shape of our country currently, and in general, I guess, too?
Well, I have a different perspective than a little bit of the average bear. My husband was the largest commercial painting contractor in Kansas City for 43 years. One of his projects was just awarded the #2 best train station in the world. He was an artisan, and he bid a project and he bonded it for $1 million. And the general contractor had no interest in doing the right thing and finishing the project and whatever. So anyway, we wrote a check for $800,000. We finished the project. It was a government project for the Corps of Engineers, actually. And we started being curious. Like, we believe life is happening for us, not to us, but we definitely were stung with the $800,000. And so we're like, how does this even work? How are we even bidding these projects? I mean, and my husband had just done the same thing for 45 years. This is the way you bid. The general contractor brings you documents, you do favors for him, you paint his mom's house, you paint his cousin's house, you buy the paint, whatever. And so we quickly realized that the unorganized, unacceptable process for construction was killing our country. I mean, killing our country. Every project is over budget, under delivered, the side deals, the handshakes, blah, blah, blah. So we reinvented the industry. We're third-party custodians of all the construction data. And what we're doing is we are keeping the project completely organized and audit ready 24 hours a day. So we're stopping construction litigation, which I want to do a Netflix series on this because it will be so good. The things we catch are like, meeting minutes getting manipulated, documents, contracts. I mean, we track everything from A to B to Z to K, and keep everyone organized. And so I can't even identify how much money we've saved our country, but our projects are finishing as much as 3 months ahead of schedule, no modifications, which in the Corps of Engineers, that's unheard of. And I started a little garage, 700 square feet with $15,000, and I bootstrapped it for 16 years.
That's amazing. And the construction industry is for me, when I think of like one of these projects that take 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And Steve, when you have a client that's involved in something like that, obviously, the controlling the financial flow is interesting too. If I'm working on a project, Steve, like it's a construction project that's a couple years, and I get cash in to do work, if I don't apply that cash that year, do I pay taxes on it? Or if it's a project that somebody's giving me and I'm still going to put the money in, how does that work?
It depends on your method of accounting, because there's different methods of accounting to account for that or not. So again, that's very detailed.
Are you is construction having the same labor problems that seem to be bewildering the rest of the nation?
Well, and this is the perspective I have. Of course they are, because the general contractors have put so many of them out of business. So the big thing is, give these minorities, I'm a minority, so I'm speaking of myself also, give them a chance in this project, split up the contract, but they have to make decisions, and they're responsible to make decisions without complete audited data. And so they're also, a lot of times we're expected to bond a project because we're just such high risk. I mean, it's just such high risk to have these minorities on a project. And that's bull crap. What the high risk is the unorganized documentation that's just thrown out there, and everyone has to be responsible for decisions that they should not have to be responsible for because they don't have the complete data, but they can never defend the claim. So basically they're just subject to whatever they can get. So with us, everybody can defend their claim. I mean, it's right here. Here's we track all emails. We track everything. I'm telling you, every drawing, every cut is linked to every detail. I mean, every phase of the project, we have a tool that we're capturing data. And then at the end of the project, one of the challenges that Steve would probably be familiar with is they're trying to run their facility for the next 50 years. So the question might be, okay, we have this roof that we have this material on that we might have had illegal workers on the roof putting the roof on. I mean, not that that would ever happen, but what's the warranty on the roof? What's the warranty? Well, the roof is leaking and you've had the project for 2 years, and now where are those documents? And so with us, point and click, there it is. Here's all the people that were on your roof. Here's the kind of material that was on your roof, la, la, la. So it's like, that is what's happening. So yes, there's a shortage of labor. The general contractor should be ashamed of themselves. They have put so many small businesses out of business. One of the general contractors we met, again, this was, I went up, I introduced myself as an American Bar Association, because a lot of lawyers refer our solution to the project. And I did the whole, hand the card, I'm subservient because I have female parts. So I'm like, hello, sir. And he goes, I would never take your card. And so he turns around, and I thought, he must not know who I am. I mean, why can't you just be kind, right? So
Well,
go ahead.
This is fascinating to me because, like, what you're talking about, I mean, the construction of a building seems to me almost like a human being, because when you started out, it's like a baby, right? And you got all the issues that a baby has and trying to figure out what it's going to look like in the end, even though you have charts and plans. And then of course you have general contractors and subcontractors. And every subcontractor I've ever met hates GCs, right? I mean, or not everyone. There's great GCs out there, right?
They get drunk together and try to be friends, but yeah.
But yeah, so, but I mean, it's interesting to see, and I wonder if, as every step along the process with all these different people, there's got to be miscommunication just happening all the time, and obviously the project manager's job is to deal with all that, right? I mean, that's his or her
yes
job.
And no, the project manager's also your friend. Okay, like seriously, Chip. I mean, we are friends. I mean, I really like you. I really think you're a good guy. I mean, we might have some extra change orders, but there's a supply chain issue. And Chip says, oh yeah, I read about that in the news. Well, show me your purchase order that you actually purchased this supply chain issue. Show me when you purchased it. Show me when it's supposed to be delivered. And then again, that's in the archive, because it's like lying, cheating, and stealing on steroids. And so this contractor I met, when I gave him my card, he said, my job is to sue the Corps of Engineers, and I always win. I said, well, sir, why don't you just steal candy from a kindergartner? Because that's about the same mentality, because the Corps of Engineers cannot defend their claim because they don't have the documents to defend their claim. And so with us, point and click, it's all right here. We just finished our first prototype project with the Corps 3 months early, no modifications and no pending litigation. Broke every single rule with just organizing and protecting the integrity of the document. Hello, here I am.
She returned to Shelly Armato on Practical Tax with Steve Moskowitz. Steve, when not to talk about the Millennium Tower specifically, because I know we don't have the details for that, but when a building goes up and it's not working out, it's not, if it's a commercial building or residential, and the owners, how is that loss amortized over a period of time? And is that an issue today with, we're talking about now some of these buildings that aren't full because of of remote working and all the things that commercial real estate might face in the days away. How do you plan for something like that? How do you make a tax plan for failure when you're, obviously thinking the exact opposite?
Well, that's a toughie. And, in theory, you're supposed to plan for everything. In reality, unless you have a crystal ball, you can't. So if something comes up, 5 years ago, who planned for a worldwide pandemic?
Well, some people were planning, but I get what you're saying. Yeah.
And the bottom line is, who thought we'd have all this remote working? And that's drastically changed commercial real estate. So the bottom line is you take the situation as it is. Oftentimes contracts have to be renegotiated because you might be with a landlord who says, well, your contract or your lease says you have to pay so much a month. And so they say, well, look, the building's empty now and I can't do that. You're a restaurateur and all of a sudden you have an empty restaurant and you say, well, look, maybe we can renegotiate the contract. And the landlord says, well, you signed the contract. Why should I do that? Because if not, somebody goes bankrupt and you get nothing.
Right.
So you have to have business principles here.
So if I have to if I'm a business and I have to renegotiate contracts with residents, that's a loss for me, right? I can deduct that as a loss generally.
It depends what type of accounting you're on. If you're on the cash basis of accounting, like most small businesses are, there's no loss to deduct because you haven't reported anything as income. It's the accrual basis of accounting that you're talking about, which usually bigger businesses use.
That's back to our Ask a Tax Attorney question. That one of the advantages of doing everything straight up and keeping solid records is in situations like this, right? When you really need that.
Solid records is so important.
Interesting. Shelly, so let me just ask you a big question here looking forward. How would you grade the state of, at least through your experience here in the Midwest, in Kansas City, if I'm not mistaken, Missouri, excuse me. How would you rate where we are and what you've seen on a macro scale for construction in this company? Are we moving forward? Is it stalled? Do you feel optimistic?
You know what? If you knew me, I'm the most optimistic person in the world. Everybody's my friend. But we build a lot of airports across the country. We work for a lot of state governments. And honestly, the budgets are just blown out of the water because they can't hold the contractor accountable. So my professional opinion is that we have to rein that back in, either with, of course, stronger contracts, but so that they can defend their contracts. So we have this whole library. Somebody described me the other day. They're like, you're like Tesla. It looks like a car, but you're actually collecting data. I'm like, yeah, we have all this data. And so we have all these contracts and we're like, gosh, look at the variation of these contracts. There should be a best practice for all these contracts. So those are the things that we're always contrasting and reviewing and considering and being the place for education. And it's been so alarming. Honestly, I started this thinking I was just helping people be organized. And now 16 years later, I'm so mad because the likes of the corruption, because they have to go through us because we're gatekeepers. So they have to send an email like, hey, will you open this closed ASI? We need to make some more comments. And we respond, just a moment, we'll ask the owner. Why didn't you ask the owner? Well, because they're trying to get around it. Or here's a new contract, replace it with this old contract. Just a moment, let us ask the owner. Or here's these bidding minutes. This stuff is seriously, people, do you take a class for this? Or is it just, how do you go home and tell your kindergartner, oh, you know what mom or daddy did today? Well, I cheated, but I got a new truck, just like he was talking about. Report your income.
Shelly, it's your website is great. And I would really, I would recommend people look at it if they want to understand a little bit more about the construction industry. And I think what you do, trying to get more women involved, is a great thing too, because obviously when you just bring in fresh eyes, things always get better, I think,
That's right.
Thank you so much, Shelly. Be well.
Thanks so much.
Nice meeting you.
Bye-bye now. Again, that's Shelly Armato from mysmartplans.com. Boy, that was interesting. That was another edition. And you can, by the way, you can see the previous editions of Practical Tax by going to MoskowitzLLP.com or just look us up on YouTube. Again, for this edition of Practical Tax with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. Chip Franklin, you have a great one, Steve.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Practical Tax Podcast with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz.